So I'm just going to take a moment to introduce two people who will be taking the lead in the final section of the conference this weekend. They're both incredible artists and educators in their own right, and I'm really excited to have them both here. Leading the discussion afterwards will be Jamie Robinson, a great friend of mine and a colleague and a terrific director and actor, very recently winner of Dora Major Moore Award for his work in Risky Phil and Young People's Theatre. And I'm extremely pleased to introduce the astoundingly talented and thoughtful and kind artist and teacher and activist, somebody who I think has become really an incredibly salient voice in driving discussion and in provoking thought, and speaks and moves through the world with an incredible bravery that I really, really admire. So please welcome me in joining Tanisha Taitt. I think I meant join me in welcoming. I said be in joining.
Thank you so much for being here. Now I feel weird standing. Okay, do you want me to sit with you?
You've earned it.
This feels bizarrely unequal. Hold on. Okay. But I still want that. It's good. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Thank you, those especially who were not in the conference and left their houses on a Sunday evening to come and hang out. I appreciate it a great deal. So, what a beautiful day. What a beautiful room. Lovely, warm faces. So appreciated. I'm just going to talk from the heart and from experience and share some things. I began teaching 10 years ago. It was preschool. I taught an arts program for children that had just turned 2. And the program was very aptly called Now You're 2. And they would come and they'd hang out and we'd draw and we'd sing and we'd talk about telling stories. And that went pretty well. So then I was offered another class for parents to come with younger children, like in arms. And it was just a class where parents could come and listen to songs and music with their kids. And that was called Tots and Tunes. And I taught those 2 classes for 3 years. Very, very eye-opening. And at the end of that process, I began working with a company called Children's Peace Theatre, which is one of the most extraordinary places I've ever been to in my life. It is a theater organization that teaches children about social justice and conflict transformation through the means of theater. And I started working with kids there that were a little bit older, 6 at the youngest, all the way up to 13. A few years after that, I started working with the TDSB as a mentor for a very cool program, which some of you may know, called TDSB Creates. And it's a program that brings professional artists into the classroom to not only cultivate the artistry in children, but to try and bring out the more creative side of teachers. And then I started working with kids that were a little bit older, 9, 10, 11. And then I was asked to be a mentor for TDSB Creates, not just in the residencies in the classrooms, but one-on-one mentorships with teenagers. And so I started working with young poets who were trying to be spoken word artists and actors, and they were a little bit older. And then opportunities came through activism to work with young women who were a little bit older, 16, 17. I got really cool opportunities through theater companies, Musical Stage, and Paprika to work with kids between 15 and 21. And I realized that every couple of years my life was handing me to children that were a little bit older. And that set me up so incredibly to land at George Brown. And I have to say that for that whole ride, and as wonderful as it's been, it is the time at George Brown, which has been short, that has made me feel my greatest sense of purpose. And when I think about it, I am so grateful and feel so blessed, and that is why I am so torn when there are things happening that are beautiful and there are things happening that are not, and you just want to swoop in and try and make things better. I'm so moved by the response to the Me Too movement in theater schools and how people have jumped on that, and they are all about it, and they want to make sure that kids are not suffering abuse and that there's as safe as possible space for people to learn and grow in. It has made me sad that there has not been a similar understanding of a lot of the emotional pain that people have been in as a result of racism in theater school. I had someone come up to me during the whole Me Too thing, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, can you believe that there's misogyny in theater school?" And I said, "Yes." And he was shocked. And I said, well, number one, I'm not shocked. I said, but why would I be surprised by any form of hurtful behavior, any form of bigotry, when I know that racism has been there for years? Many, many, many years. And it's different from the type of abuse that we've talked about earlier in the conference, the type of very clear emotional or at times physical or sexual abuse that goes on, because you can point to that much more easily. And often you talk about there being a couple of bad apples in a bunch, or one bad apple. And many schools have had to deal with situations where a singular teacher has all but tarnished the reputation of the school. And then you have to work really hard to build it back. Racism at theater school is very, very different. It's not about bad apples. It is tacit and unconscious and systemic and foundational. And that's just the way it is. Because when you build anything on a very colonial, Eurocentric foundation, that's going to be the default unless you decide otherwise. And so I realized that when I was offered the chance to come to George Brown, that it wasn't going to be about looking for bad apples. It was going to be looking at the apple cart itself and doing what I could to upset it. Because it needed to be, and it still needs to be. And upset has such a negative connotation. I don't mean like smash your cart all over the place. But I mean tilt it, let all the apples run out so you can see them more clearly. Then you look at each one and you decide what's worth putting back in the cart and what you can just let rot. And so I've spent this time really thinking about the apple cart that is George Brown, but all of the apple carts, all of the schools that people here work at, and what all of those apples are: the students, the faculty, the various pedagogies, and the multiple curricula. All apples, some bruised, some fantastic and ripe and delicious, some rotten to the core. And it's our job to look at all of those apples and decide what has earned a place in the cart and what has not. I want to really focus in on cultural and racial diversity in this conversation, because that is what I know and am closest to. I do not in any way think that that is the only type of diversity that needs to be addressed in theater school. We know that there are lots of kids from various marginalized groups, and the faculty and the curriculum is not necessarily representing them. So as we look at LGBT kids and we ask ourselves, how much do they see themselves? And we look at trans kids, how much do they see themselves? But we also look at kids that sometimes are really in the fringes. How many of us work in theater schools where we could commit and embrace a kid that had to spend 2 to 4 years at that school in a wheelchair? Can we do it? Do we think about them the way that we need to? I think many of us think about them. It just unfortunately stops at thinking so often, because it seems like how to go about changing it is insurmountable, or at the very least, rife with challenge. There is a lot of talk when you talk about diversity in theater school. I'm kind of over the word diversity, just because we've been using it for about 40 years. The first thing people talk about is there are not enough students of color at theater schools, and there aren't. And as somebody who works with high school students and sees who those students are in grade 10 and 11 and 12 music and drama, something happens where they just stop believing that that is an option for themselves. And all of this incredible talent that you see in these classes, that you see as hobbies, kind of goes to the wayside, and there are lots of reasons for that. For some, they are the children of immigrant parents who don't want to take a chance on their child having a career that doesn't go anywhere. Many of them have come here to give their kids a more secure life. And so when the kid says, I want to be an actor, that's like you give them a stroke. That is not what they came for. And so you have a lot of parents who are very, very reticent. And on top of that, when they look at the industry, they're not seeing a lot of people that look like their kids to give them the confidence. If they walked into most of our schools and looked at the student bodies, they wouldn't be like, my kid is totally going to thrive here. There's no reason for them to really believe that. So yes, there are too few students of color, and that takes conscious outreach. Conscious, concerted outreach. Not just, they don't audition. Are you going to them? Are you letting them know that programs exist? A lot of people don't know what is actually out there, what their options in post-secondary education are. And so I'm so committed to this idea of representatives from theater schools going to high schools and talking to students and letting them know we are an option for you when you're done here. If you love acting, if the arts are in your heart and soul, there is something that you can do. And you can do it with us, or you can apply to do it with us. And maybe if we not only talked to students, but talked to some of their parents, we could open up some minds and make people believe that they are truly valued and welcome at theater schools, because there are many people now who do not believe that to be the case. And it's interesting because the schools know that diversity is a good idea. They know that it sells well. They know that it's the right thing. And so I'm amused constantly by theater schools all over the country that put the 3 students of color on their brochure. And then there's no one else in the school. And you just have to laugh to keep from crying most of the time. But they use it for marketing to make that diversity appear to be the rule and not the glaring exception at their schools, which is usually the case. So more students are a start. A start. But I have to say that that in itself means very, very little if there is not a deep-seated commitment to do the same with faculty. It's a non-starter if people don't want to have that conversation, because faculty chart the course for these students and determine what they will learn and how they will feel for the next 2 to 4 years. I've been really, really privileged to mentor a lot of teenagers, and many of them have gone on to theater school. Some have now graduated from theater school. And I'll sit with them and I'll say, how are you feeling? What are you thinking? What are you up to? What was the experience like for you? And they will open up and they will tell me about their early days, those excited days when they met their classes for the first time and they met their teachers and they got reading lists. And then they would look at those lists, and most of the white students would be very excited, and most of the non-white students would keep looking through the list, looking for the non-white playwright, and very often would not find one. And so they would see play after play, and playwright after playwright, and they would search for themselves, and they weren't there. And they would have a moment of realization. But I'll get back to that. I will say this. It should not be a shocker that non-white students need non-white teachers. But apparently it is. If you look at the schools, apparently it is. We all need a combination of people in our lives. That's just how we grow, how we learn, how we evolve as humans. And that's not to say that they cannot have extraordinary white teachers that they love and that support them and that root for them. But they also need to see themselves in the equation. They need to feel that they have a place not just as students, but if they wanted to teach, that they could. They have to see themselves in that echelon too, and often they just don't. They need people who can be role models. Role models in the most intimate way of looking at somebody and having that person look like yourself. And too many students of color do not have that experience for the entire theater school journey. And so I have to say that anytime I come across a chair or a dean that thinks it's okay to just not diversify a faculty for years and years and years and years and years and years and years, I have a real red flag with that person. And I understand communities are different. Toronto is not the same as Moose Jaw. Demographics are different. If you have a town that doesn't have an incredibly diverse population, okay, I understand that. But I say this. Your obligation to teach the students that you do have about more than one type of person stays the same. You don't have to have the other type of people in the class to teach about a broader world. We should be teaching everybody that, no matter what our particular class looks like. I had a very interesting educational journey, but at one point, theater was not my first choice. I was in love with music. I was en route to become a singer-songwriter. That's what I wanted to do. After spending some time at Ryerson, I was at a school called the Harris Institute for the Arts, which is a private music education school. And so I did an honors double major there in audio production and music business management, because I wanted to be able to understand the music business, to not be played for a fool by anybody, and to sit in my room and make my own records if I wanted to. And there weren't a lot of women at my school. There were a lot of guys in bands at my school. A lot of white guys in bands. And I very, very much stood out. But there was something that was very much a comfort, and that was in the curriculum. When we studied music, when we studied music history, black music was everywhere. And so even though I didn't have students that looked like me, I was very much rooted in a narrative that I understood. And I think that that's how theater school is very, very different, because the kids of color don't even have that. There is a forum that I went to a few years ago. It was at the Aki Studio, and it was one of the zillion forums on diversity in theater. An artist stood up, a black female artist, and she said something that I have never forgotten. She said that she did not have a single friend of color who had graduated from theater school and had not been deeply damaged. I don't know why that surprised me, but to hear it in that room was so profound. And we all know theater school is easy for nobody. We talked this morning about there are kids being traumatized who are white all the time. So add racial traumatization to that, the kind of paralysis that could create. She made this comment and the room went very silent, and then the panelists just kind of started nodding. They all understood it. And it broke my heart that it was something that was so readily understood. We have to create a space where people feel wanted, where people feel that they are interesting, and that people truly want to engage with and support and illuminate them. And I think we're still working on that. I've heard too many tales of isolation. I've heard too many tales of people of color leaving after first year and looking for another school that makes them feel a little bit better. Because it's a really bizarre experience to be visibly different from everybody else and yet to not be represented in anything. So you feel profoundly visible and profoundly invisible simultaneously. And that is super weird. I think that there was a time, maybe the 70s, the 80s, I'll even give the 90s, when we could say that we didn't know better. I think that time is done. I think that time is done. And the excuses and the talking around it, it doesn't fly anymore. Because when I talk to young people, they know the scoop. When I talk to people teaching today who are progressive and forward-thinking, they know the scoop. And I just want to say, think about what that would feel like to be going to school every day and to know that you're there and people see that you're there and they see that you are different, but you're never discussed, and you don't know if you're there at times because people think you're really talented, or if you're there because they wanted you on the brochure, you don't know. You don't know. And so that desire to be great is so intense, and it can really lead to, we've been talking about mental health. It can lead to some serious mental health challenges on top of just the incredible stress that theater school can land on one's shoulders. In my classes, I had taught 2 classes, I came in with the idea that whatever the syllabus had been, I was changing it radically. And it wasn't, any kind of a middle finger to the syllabus. I just knew that I was going to go in and I was going to be myself. And I was going to bring plays that I wanted to bring and that I thought would be interesting for the students to learn. And coming from the perspective that I come from, those plays were radically different from a lot of what they were learning. And I would talk to them about what they had done so far, and they would just keep saying that they hadn't done any writers of color so far. And this wasn't just in first year. The same was being said in second year. And thank gosh that we have now an amazing coordinator at our school who has really taken steps to be like, no, you are going to read Thompson Highway, and you are going to read Janet Sears because they are Canadian and they are great. But before that, it just didn't happen. It just didn't happen. Left to their own devices, a lot of teachers were not doing it. And I'm so grateful now that we have someone whose finger is on the pulse. But before that, they would just, they would say that they hadn't done anything. And I would think to myself about the fact that we are, I don't know if this is still the truth, but I know that according to the UN, back when I was in my 20s, we were the most multicultural city on the planet. And I asked myself, how is it possible for Toronto theatre schools to only be teaching white writers? That is insanity. That is absolute insanity. And great. I mean, people that if you're going into a career, you should be able to talk about. And they just didn't know. That was very shocking for me. I remember being at work one day, and I have no idea what this particular pile of plays was about, but there was just a long, long counter of just tons of plays that people were using for various classes. And I was kind of just looking at them. And literally, this is what I saw. I'm just going to use the word white as abbreviation for white writer. So it was white, 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 raisin in the sun, white, 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 white. And I was like, Jesus Lord. And I was like, okay, so this is what I'm here for, because that's not good enough. I asked my class if they were interested in doing a broad range of stuff. I said that's what I wanted to do, and the ravenousness with which they said yes was very eye-opening to me. They kept saying that they wanted difference. They wanted something that wasn't expected. They wanted to read more stories about people unlike themselves. They were seriously, seriously craving it. And so I was really grateful for the opportunity to bring more into that class. In my first year contemporary scene study class, it was very different. We studied James Baldwin, which was incredible. We did Harlem Duet. We did the piano lesson and fences. And I remember the kids, I keep calling them kids, I shouldn't call them kids. I call people kids until they're about 29. The students were at first a little taken aback because it was so different to so many of them. And they would read things and there would be lingo and there would be things they didn't quite understand, but the desire to penetrate it and to learn it and to take it in was so great. They were scared for 5 minutes and then they were all over it. Absolutely all over it. And to watch them be all over it was one of the great joys of my life. And I thought to myself, is it possible that these students could have left third year and never read an August Wilson play? And I realized, yeah, it was happening. And don't even get me started on the Asian kids or the Latino kids or the Arab kids. For those kids, it's like negation completely. They just don't see themselves. And so for my second year Canadian Scene Study class, we did Kim's Convenience, which was a hoot and a half. It brought such absolute joy in the room, and I really, really loved it. Now this opens up a whole Pandora's box, because people say to me, well, which students do you have doing which plays and all of that stuff? And I say, everybody's doing everything. And I'll tell you why. Obviously, we know that there are professional boundaries. I am not going to go and see the all-white Raisin in the Sun. That is a bad idea. I believe, though, and I firmly believe this, that you need to break down walls when it comes to education. And when it comes to education, you have to give students the opportunity to play as much as they can and read as much as they can and step into the shoes of as many people as they can. Because it will stretch them and it will breed empathy. And to me, empathy and acting are synonymous. And so it was so wonderful to bring this stuff in. I mean, they were like, am I really playing this black preacher? And I'm like, yes! And they'd be like, okay. And then they'd rehearse for 2 weeks and then they'd do it and they'd make me cry. There was such a freedom to just try and jump in, because so often the characters were so far removed from them, they didn't feel the same pressure to get it right immediately. They didn't feel like, well, this is kind of like me, so I should do this. They were like, okay, I am not this guy. So I am going to create my version of this. And it was really, really beautiful. And obviously, there's a certain amount of responsibility that you have to take in choosing what you do. I look for scenes that are universal. I look for scenes that are about people being people and people being families. I'm not going to pick the most Korean scene in Kim's Convenience to ask the white kids to play. I'm going to pick a scene that is just about people being people. And then I watch them dive in and just find the meat in it and come to understand how, in some ways, the essence of people is the same. And it's a really beautiful realization. About 3 days into class, day 3, we read a play called Church by Young-Jin Lee. It's a very bizarre play about a Pentecostal church in which people are super, super strange. And I just gave them the freedom to play the parishioners as bizarrely as they wanted to play them. And it was such an opportunity for them to just let go of some of the defenses and to let go of the fear, which is so rampant at the beginning of theater school, and understandably so. And I remember at the end of that, not only had they been introduced to this Asian playwright, and then I could point them to other work of hers, but they had this introductory ensemble moment of just being ridiculous together, and it was a really beautiful piece, and it was day 3. I am hoping that we are getting to a point, and I think we are, I'm very hopeful about the educators in this room, where we can see that the sea of homogeny is giving people pause and making people say, wait a second, we've got to do something. We've got to flip the script somehow. Because we're educators. And you can't properly educate people when you tell singular stories. Yes, I know that there are many different stories of Europeans. But still, we've got to open that up. We have got to open that up. Because, 2 or 3 or 4 years is not very long. We don't have a lot of time with them. And so what we do in that time is absolutely crucial. I know that a lot of people now are into the idea, and I know that most of you will be not into this because you're smarter, but into the idea of my students are my students, they're all the same, I'm colorblind. Okay, so I've had faculty, not at George Brown, but people who teach elsewhere, talk about how, we just do the work and I don't see color, and I stop them right there. First of all, what the hell does that mean? Do your retinas work? If they do, then you're lying. And secondly, when people say that, they are saying, I am so magnanimous that I see past this impediment that you have to the real you. When you decide that you are going to try to be colorblind, what you are saying is that you are going to stop seeing people in their totality. If I walk into this room and I sit down to do this speech and you don't notice that I'm black, that's a problem. And it also, I think, affects the impact of the speech. You need to that race, be it a societal construct or not, leads to real experiences. And so when you say that you don't see color, you say, I don't see your pain, I don't see your anguish, I don't see the unfairness, I don't see my privilege, I don't see any of it, because I have to see a distinction in color to see those things. So if I don't see color, I don't see any of those things. And you hear that all the time. You hear why do people have to make it about race? And why are you playing the race card? Okay, playing the race card is a term that is used when people don't want to have a conversation about race. That is their back pocket term. You're playing the race card. I want you to just imagine that you are a student, a non-white student, and you walk into school with all of the hopes in the world. You want to be an actor, or you want to be a director. And you're so all about that. And the school says, you have a home here, or at least the brochure cover does. And then you get there. And I said before that the students that I spoke to, or the former students, had that moment of realization. And it's that moment that they realized that when they look at that reading list, when they look at the faculty, that they have just signed on to essentially play white for the next 2 to 4 years. And not only have they signed on to play white, but they've signed on to pay thousands of dollars to do it. And they sit there and they ask themselves what that means, what that is going to feel like if they are allowed to say anything about it. And they don't. They eat it because so many of our students, depending on how their program is structured, they are so terrified that they're not going to make the next term that they don't want to rock any sort of a boat. So if they are feeling racially aggrieved and they know that that school's looking to take a few people out, they don't want to make themselves the easy pick. And so they stay quiet. They stay quiet a lot. And they sit in these classrooms where every play is not them. And I ask you to just imagine that it's you. Imagine that it's you. And you were back in theater school, and you come in, I can't wait to dig into the parts that are like me and the ones that are not like me, but that I'm going to make like me, and you're so excited. And somewhere within the first month of theater school, all of you who are white in this room are told, okay, this is going to be awesome. Here's your reading list. You're only going to play black people for 4 years. Just thought you should know. I hope that's okay. We love you. How does that feel? How destabilizing would that feel? How discombobulating would that feel? And how removed would you feel from what you knew that you could cling to and dive into? And that is the experience of kids of color in theater school every day. Every day, they're trying to find their way into something that is intrinsically not them. And yes, they're actors, but they're also humans. And they feel all the time that they are denied the head start of at least having that narrative link somewhere that the white kids have by default with pretty much every piece of theater that they do. And it's exhausting. It's exhausting. It is...
No, sorry.
It's exhausting. It's an irresponsible thing to do to them. And I'll go so far as to say that it's cruelty. It's straight up cruelty. And I'm personally really tired of it. But now I want to say something that I don't think people think about. And that is that it's really cruel to the white kids too. Because you are denying them. In our global population, the majority of people are not white. When you deny white kids the stories of the lion's share of humanity, you rob them. That is not okay. It's not okay. And so to watch these kids in my second year class, I had 22 kids. There was not a non-white kid in that class. And yet I came to that class and we did Kim's Convenience and we did The Refugee Hotel by Carmen Aguirre and we did The Adventures of a Black Girl in Search of God and we mined that and they sat in those characters in a way that was so incredibly beautiful. And anybody who wants to argue with me that that shouldn't be happening, I will defend that to my dying day. It was an incredible thing to watch. But why it's more important that the white kids get this breadth is because there are things that are very, very tacit in our society. And one of them is this notion of supremacy and supremacist thought. And what happens is, when you don't teach them anything else, you tell them tacitly, this is what's worth learning, this is the best. That's it. That's what you tell them. And you don't have to say it. It's just what they walk away with. And so you ask yourself, is this what you want them to learn? I want kids of every race to understand that there is greatness everywhere. In my class this year, my classes, I watched these kids, some of the blondest, blue-eyedest kids you've ever seen, whom I adore, become intimately acquainted with Black excellence. And that was divine. It's going to change them. It already has changed them. It will increase their compassion. It will increase their understanding and their acceptance of other people in the world. It will make them seek out other writers that are great. And they will be deeper actors and deeper directors and better human beings for it and deeper thinkers for it. And that matters to me. That matters deeply to me. And I don't understand how there exists any educator for whom that doesn't matter as deeply. I've had people be really confused when I tell them that my class is doing cross-racial work. And I spoke to a white teacher at George Brown talking about the piano lesson, and he said to me, he was really curious, he's like, I wonder if I could get away with that. And I said, I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe not. Because it really has to do with where you're coming from. What is your way in? And so rather than having schools try and figure out, okay, how do we train the white teachers to teach the Indigenous and the Black stuff? Why don't we make space for the teachers who are that? And let them take the lead on that. There's a thought. There's a thought. I'm so happy to see that that's happening where I teach, and I'm hoping that throughout the country it's starting to happen as well. And I think that we're here to teach each other as educators. I'm happy to have any white teacher say, Tanisha, can I sit in your class for a day? Yeah, let's hang, let's talk. I'm totally down with that. And I wish that we could really be resources to each other more than we are. I think we can become very insular with our students and with what we're doing and not see how we can feed each other in a way that's really productive and ultimately helpful to the students. Students understand that education and professional theater are two different things. I had one of my students in my final interview say to me, she got to play the character of Rainey in The Adventures of a Black Girl, and she came to me and she said, I am so grateful that I got to play this character that I should never play again. And I said, yeah. And she did a beautiful job, but through doing the work and through learning that story of this Black family in Ontario dealing with what they were dealing with at the time, her respect for that narrative grew so much that she now realizes, that is not mine. I did it, and now I know that that is not mine. And it was a really powerful thing. And I'm so grateful that they have shown the willingness that they have to just absolutely dive in. I remember years ago when Blair Underwood played Stanley Kowalski on Broadway. Does anyone remember that? And it was a really big deal. Black guy, Black Stanley! People were like losing their minds. Some people thought it was great. A lot of racists came out of the woodwork and were horrendous about it. There's a difference between whether you are the traditionally oppressed group playing the non-oppressed group or vice versa. That is a fundamental difference. But in my class, I feel it's just as important to have the white students have the words in their mouth of characters that are opposite races too, and to crawl around in that and to widen their lens. We always talk about people and their gaze. Well, let's change their gaze. Let's widen their lens by giving them more, by allowing them to challenge themselves to see the world through a greater expanse of cultures. As I sat in my class, as conversations came up about race, that I think that I was prepared to lead in a way that many people would not be prepared to lead. And that's why I think that we have to be really careful. We don't just say, okay, we're going to do this, and then not practice real due diligence. But I remember we were talking about fences, and people were great, and they were making great points, but they were really quiet. And I just felt that there was something in the room. And so I said, he says nigger a lot. And they were like, yes! And then we had a conversation. And I understand that many of you would not feel comfortable leading that conversation. But that's why the panorama of teachers is so important. Is so important. So that when those things come up, you have teachers that are going into that knowing, I can take this. And then teachers who don't feel that that's their particular wheelhouse, you do you, and you do it really greatly, and that's how they get everything. And I wish that more colleges could understand that. If they could understand that, just imagine how much the students could learn by the time they graduate, how many different stories and characters and narratives they could see. It would be extraordinary. And so my sweet Ian in first year, who's like, I'm just a 19-year-old white boy. I'm not sure. And I said, I love that you're not sure. And then he disappeared and did work and took notes and did work and did a scene from the Amen Corner by James Baldwin that was so true and so beautiful and made me so proud. And then I have two other students who I can't wait for them to graduate just so I can get my hands on working with them. They're so good. My students, Jack and Lauren, who I threw at them fences, and I gave them the most emotional scene between the characters of Rose and Troy. And they smashed it. I mean, I wept openly. To see them get from that place that they started at to taking all of the necessary leaps, it was so incredibly moving and stunning and beautiful. In my first year, I had young one black woman in my class. And one of the plays that I did, which is one of my favorite plays on the planet, was Intimate Apparel. And she got to play the role of Esther. And I remember when I handed her that, I have not seen anybody light up like that. Because it was the first time she was like, a role that was written for me. She'd never had one. I mean, right now, she'd never had one. What a concept that students should be able to experience this. One of my female friends who's in her 20s that graduated a few years ago, I remember having tea with her one day, and she said that she had felt, even though she learned a lot, she had felt like her white friends had gotten more out of their tuition. And I said, oh, give me more of that. And she said that in her years at school, she had learned a very fantastic Polish accent. She had learned a really good Russian, a really good Irish. She could knock those out of the park easily. But as a dark-skinned black woman, she had not learned a single accent in theater school that could get her the job she'd be hired for. Not one. She had not been taught one African dialect, one Caribbean dialect, not even an African American dialect. And she's like, and my white friends have this whole wheelhouse of stuff now that they can use. I'm never going to get cast as an Irish girl. And stuff like that breaks my heart. It breaks my heart because it is not right and it is not fair, and we have to think in a much more expansive way. We can't just let people in the school just to tick a box and then not think about what they need when they're there. What do they need when they're there so that they don't want to leave? So that they don't leave feeling like, why did I spend that money? We want them leaving feeling fulfilled, all students, but we want them to leave feeling equally fulfilled. And with the kids I've worked with, I want that when they leave, they have been so exposed to things and have developed such a sense of empathy that no matter what area of theater they go into, they will carry that with them. Because some of them will be actors, but some won't. And if one of them one day is the artistic director of Cam Stage, I want them to have gotten something from my class that makes it fundamentally impossible for them to program 15 white plays in a season. That's what I want. I want them to be so aware and so connected that that is just an impossibility. And if we all thought that way, what we could do. I'm so grateful for those making the moves to change it. That is what leadership looks like. That is what it looks like. And no matter where you live, if you have one kid in your class, one kid in your town who is in theater school who is not white, you have an obligation to that child. You have an obligation to that student to make them feel seen. Not to say, well, there's only one, so. Because that's a life. That's a life. And it matters. In so many ways, I feel like making these changes is part of my life's work. I'm so grateful to all educators who see and want to move forward and want to transform, because transformation is everything, and who understand that inclusion is not enough. Integration is what we want. That's what we want. We want the students that are there to feel part of it. I'm not just in the building and floating in classes. When I open my books, I'm there. When I look at my teachers, I'm there. And that's not happening for so many people. And we have to change that. It's not an if, it's a when. We have to change that. People are going to graduate feeling that they have been unseen. And that is devastating to me. I mentioned to one teacher, he asked me what I was doing in my class, and I mentioned that I was doing 2 plays by Lynn Nottage, Intimate Apparel, and another one called By the Way We Fear Start. Oh, 2 Nottage plays? That's interesting. So I asked him how many plays he was doing in his Chekhov unit. And then the conversation was over. Alright. Please know this before I leave you. Young children of color, long before they get to the age of theater school, learn how to be uncomfortable. People of color learn how to be uncomfortable all the time. We just do. And then it gets to the place where if you build yourself up and you know yourself enough and you come to know people and to know people's hearts, you can be less so. But that takes work. Otherwise, I'd be uncomfortable right now. And I'm not. But that actually takes work. And when you are in the minority, you understand that in a way that you never do when you're in the majority. You just don't. There are things you just don't think about. You don't have to. It's nothing negative that you don't think about it. It's just that your life does not necessitate that you do. And for other people, it does. But my last point is that those young children, those little black boys who are going to grow up to be seen as thugs by the time they're 12 if they wear their hat the wrong way, or those little black girls who live in that crazy intersectional space between femalehood and blackness, it is hard. And what they see in the world is that their stories aren't very important. And they see it early. And that's why, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the doll experiment, where they give young children black dolls and white dolls, and the black children are all reaching for the white doll, and they say the black doll's ugly, the black doll's bad. They don't learn that from nowhere. Mm-hmm. They learn it from us. They learn it from society that says, you are not important, you are less, you are the criminal, you are the this. When we do put you in the play, you'll be the maid. That's what they learn. And it's our job to shake that up, because that's nonsense. That's absolute nonsense. I don't want any more young children who have the fire in them and the desire to be great artists and great actors thinking, I can't do that because that's for white people. That is happening. And then they want to be white instead of loving who they are, and that rips me to shreds. So let's think of how we can all together make space for everybody, how we can reach out in a loving and truthful way and welcome people, and then consciously work to integrate them and their stories and their lives and their truths into our collective education. Because our education doesn't stop just because we're educators. It should be continuing every day, and it should be continuing through our students. They teach me so much, and I'm deeply grateful for that. That's it. Thank you.